You're listening to the AmWritingFantasy podcast. In today's publishing landscape, you can reach fans all over the world. Query letters are a thing of the past. You don't even need a literary agent. There is nothing standing in the way of making a living from writing. Join two best-selling authors who have self-published more than 20 books between them. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Autumn Burt and Jesper Schmidt.
Hello, I'm Jesper.
And I'm Autumn.
This is episode 40 of the AmWritingFantasy podcast, and we are going to talk about character arcs today. So, yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting conversation because character arcs are pretty important.
They are, and well, as we just were recently talking to each other, and I said characters are easier to understand than most people, so I think we're going to nail this one pretty good.
Yeah, and the thing with characters is that we have control of what they say and what they do, right? So it's much easier than real life people.
Insert evil laugh here. So yes, I think this will be really good, and it's important to understand your character. So this will be a lot of fun. I love adding depth and finding new ways to bring out different aspects of characters. So we'll try not to get carried away with this one.
Who knows where we're going to end up? And actually, speaking of real life people, I was in Sweden this last week.
Oh yeah,
and I don't understand people. I mean, I think the longer I live, the more I figure out that I don't understand people. So I was in the airport in Stockholm queuing for to enter the plane to fly back home to Copenhagen. And then I don't know how they do it in the US, but at least here, if you have priority seats, then you're called on first.
Okay. Yeah.
And then they scan your boarding pass and whatnot to make sure that you are actually a priority customer. And luckily enough, I am one of those.
So you travel all the time.
Yeah, I fly so much that I'm a priority customer. So, so the thing is that. And this is what I don't get, right? So I'm queuing at that airport, and I need to board the plane, and they call priority customers. So we go up and we stand in the queue, and of course scan the boarding pass, and then you enter the plane, right? But there was again, and this is not because it's not just happened once; it happens all the time. But this time there was 5 people in that queue who were not priority customers, who tried to skip in and get on board. And it's like, and every time it happens, I'm like, why do people do this? I don't understand. They can see that their boarding pass is getting scanned. They know that they're going to get caught. And they're still standing there in the queue trying to get in. I mean, I don't get it.
Just to go and sit down. I always laugh because we take ferries quite a lot. And the best sign I ever saw was at the front of a ferry that said, "Do not turn on your car engine. So far, no car has reached the dock before the ferry." Like, yes! You're not going to make the plane go any faster by boarding faster. It's not going to happen. You're not going to beat the actual airplane.
No, but it's just, I mean, the thing about wanting to get on board, and I mean, that's one of the things, honestly, I do like about being a priority customer, because you sort of get on board and you get to sit down after standing in the queue, and there is space in the overhead compartments for your luggage because there's nobody else on the plane at that point. So that part I do like. So I sort of understand why people want to get on board. But since the boarding cards are scanned and you're going to get caught, that's where my logic sort of doesn't add up anymore. I just don't understand. So you're trying to skip line on something you're going to get caught. So what the heck is the point?
Maybe they just like to get yelled at. I don't have any better insight than that. I can't say I understand people all the time. Sometimes I don't understand myself. I mean, heck, we haven't been on video chat here today, and we're not on video right now, so you guys can't see, but I actually have some pretty radical, awesome purple streaks in my hair. So if you wanted to ask why I decided to add purple to my hair, I don't know. I felt like it. So people are a little strange. However, there is one thing I do understand, and we do this, with our course, with our students, and my niece and I just teamed up to be accountability partners. So she's working associate's degree. Yeah, my niece Kayla, if you're listening, big shout out. She's one of my fans, my biggest fan in my family. So I think that's so wicked cool. I love talking to her.
Nice.
But
How old is your niece?
She is, oh God, you're going to ask me this.
Oh, no, I shouldn't have asked
21.
that.
She's 21. I do know it. Actually, I think she just turned 22, so sorry if I missed that. But yes, she's just in college. She's having a good old time. And she loves fantasy and fantasy books, so we get to talk about writing and books and all these things that she gets into, which is fantastic. But she had some stuff she wanted to work on. And as I've said in the last couple episodes, I was on a writing break and I'm getting back into it and it's kind of going slow. And so we got talking. She's like, well, I'm trying to do, some mindfulness and some yoga and I want to get back. And she does some fantasy art. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to get back into my fantasy art and I'm really getting bad at my writing. She's like, that's it. We are emailing each other. So she emails me on Wednesday and I email her on Saturday and we have to reply back, obviously, when the other one emails and say how we've been doing. And it's working.
Okay.
It is working. So that is the awesome thing. I can't say I've written chapters, but I am getting through a scene that is very sticky, but that's a whole different conversation of what do you do when you plan something and plot something and then a scene decides to take over and take what is way too long. It should have ended a chapter ago, but the characters keep drawing out this one thing. And logically, I know when I get to editing, I can just cut it down. And right now, this is just the way the process is going, and I just need to keep writing. But I'm just annoyed and I want to get past this scene. But anyway, my niece Kayla is helping me and making sure I am writing. And I've done a new book cover, and she's doing good on her yoga and meditation, and we're doing good.
Oh, that's perfect. So just unpacking that a bit. So what are you emailing to each other what your goals are for the next week? Or are you just giving each other a status update or what are you doing?
Mostly status updates because we know we have our goals that we know we both want to either, at least be working on it and writing or at least doing the yoga. So I just say, hey, this is what I've been doing and check in. Have you been doing this? And she'll say, yeah, yes or no, I haven't quite done that as much as I wanted to. So right now we don't have any specific word count goals or anything, but we're at least trying to make sure we're getting it in. And for me, she knows I'm trying to write every day. So it's just if I say I skipped a day, I'm still saying I skipped a day. So trying to make sure I at least get a sentence in, then I can say I wrote, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, I have heard it before about accountability partners, and of course that's also something that you and I try to do, Autumn, with the courses or the students that we get for our online writing course to serve a bit as accountability partners and try to answer people's questions every month if they have questions or if they want on the fly stuff, then be there in the Mastermind Facebook group for the students. So I do think it's important because, and we probably talked about this many times before, but being an author is such a lonely profession. So it's good to have somebody who is sort of, your wingman there.
Absolutely. And I'm loving it. And it's a good excuse to get to email my niece every twice a week. So that's kind of fun too, to see what's going on. I get to relive my, college days through her.
It's kind of weird when the young ones, I was about to say, grows up, but it's kind of weird, it's different conversations. I also went for probably I think 2 weeks ago. My older son, he felt like he needed some time alone, him and me, so we just went to a beach for a walk, and it's funny when they get older because that he really enjoys that, just for a walk, just to go and talk for an hour.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And that's all he wanted to do, and that was great. I mean, when they're younger, that they're it's gonna bore them to death, right? but it's funny how things change.
Yeah, it is. That's always when I never had kids, but for my nieces and nephews, it's when they get old enough to talk back, and you can feed them ideas to drive their parents nuts. That was my favorite part. But I think we might be an ocean apart here. I'm thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think on my side here, it's also been really busy lately. I'm desperately trying to get the some modules recorded for our future course on fantasy world building.
Oh, you're doing awesome.
Yeah, well, I'm making progress, but I have a goal to finish my recordings within the next 2 weeks. And quite honestly, I don't know if my accountability partner, if I had one, would think that would be possible. But let's see if I can make it. It's been a bit too busy lately because we've also had our online writing course open for the first time in 6 months. And of course, when you, dear listener, are listening to this podcast episode, the course will be closed again. But you can still go to ultimatefantasiewritersguide.com/main if you want to sign up for the waitlist. That's still possible, and then you will be the first one to know next time around. But it's just been one of these couple of weeks where it's been incredibly busy. So that's it.
A week on the internet with the Am Writing Fantasy podcast.
Oh, and I think, first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to Sade, who joined us on Patreon. So that was awesome, and
Welcome.
we really appreciate it.
Yeah. It's great to have a new one join us, and he was already, he'd found us, I think, through the podcast as well. So that is just, makes me feel good to give back another shout out to him.
Yeah, absolutely, and all the support we can get from people will basically keep or help keep the lights on for the Am Writing Fantasy podcast. So yeah, I mean, I think I speak for both Autumn and myself when I say that we really enjoy making this new podcast format compared to the old YouTube videos. But that said, I also want to point out the obvious, I guess, but it is still quite a lot of work to do this. So even $1 in support does make a difference. So anyway, thanks again, Sade, for your support, and we hope that you will enjoy the rewards that you are getting out of Patreon. Actually, I can let you know, by the way, Sade, when you're listening to this, that I did post your Am Writing Fantasy bookmark already, and I don't know, maybe by the time you hear this episode, because we're always recording a bit in advance, you might already have received it. So check out Patreon, and there is a link in the show notes, and then you can learn about all those rewards that we are offering to those who support us. And I guess, Autumn, there is quite a lot of rewards, actually, even if you're only supporting with $1 a month.
Yeah, we like to give back because I think it's not even, the dollar helps keep the lights on, but it's sort of like getting comments and stuff. It's it makes you know that this is important to people, and that is a huge motivator for us to keep going, as much as getting a little bit of money to actually pay the licensing fees and the website and all those little things that kind of go along with running an online business. So thank you for all of our Patreon supporters. It's always fantastic to have them here. And we were talking about comments, and you had mentioned before about other authors, and it's a network, and that was the biggest thing. I know I've been talking to a couple authors, and I've seen a lot of posts. I hang out a lot on Instagram, I admit, and I have seen so many authors this last week commenting that they had such a rough August that they've been taking a break even from social media or from writing or from something in their life, because for some reason, it wasn't just me. It was a really rough August for a lot of people. So, a big shout out to a lot of authors that, hey, just remember you're not alone. It's nice to know that I wasn't the only person in the world having a rough August. I'd rather, I wish we all had a fantastic, I can't wait until we're all shouting about how wonderful of an October we're having. I just think that's an important thing. And actually, if you do happen to go to Instagram, if you're an Instagrammer and you go to my profile, which is just Autumn Burt, I'm really hard to find. I actually just shared this really cool mental map that had some really neat aspects. And Jesper, I should share this with you because you will love it. Mm-hmm. It is a mental map that is drawn in the image of a fantasy map. It has things the I spend too much time online falls, the dormant volcano of blind ambition, the mountain range of impotent rage. So
I'm already loving it. I want to see that.
I will have to send it to you. It is super awesome. I told everyone that I am currently living in the glade of hopeful aspirations while drinking from the river of pleasure of small things. So that is where I am currently living. And I'm ignoring that outside thing that people call reality. It just sucks. I'm happy in my glade of hopeful aspirations, and just leave me here for the rest of the fall.
Yeah, but you know what? Do you think it would be possible to to have a link to it to somewhere, because then I could put it in the show notes, and then the listeners could see it as well.
Yeah, I think I can share just the post with you, and that way they can go straight to it. And if not, I'll do a screenshot. So I will get.
Do you need an Instagram account to be able to view it?
That's the one thing I love about Instagram. It's not like Facebook. You don't get kicked out just because you don't have an account. Anyone can see it. So I will make sure I get that over to you, because it is kind of awesome. And it's a good reminder you're, one, not alone, because so many other people feel, that they're living in the crippling insecurityville. It's a whole community. Come join us.
Yeah. No, that sounds awesome. And I guess I just sort of outed myself on how little I know about Instagram since I had to ask about that.
That's okay. You're much more, I used to be so much more active on Twitter, and that is definitely where you are. You got your forte on Twitter, and I've kind of backed up, and sometimes I go there and I'm like, you can do what now? So fair's fair. Yeah,
I do post a lot on Twitter for sure. That's a given. I like that community there, quite honestly.
And on to today's topic.
Oh, character arcs.
Yes, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's awesome. I really like characters arc, but maybe before we get into all of this, maybe we need to define what we're talking about.
Right. So character arcs, that is a very good point. Just because, that used to be one of my pet peeves. You'd hear something batted around like show, don't tell. Without
exactly.
no explanation.
And you're like, what the hell does that mean?
I know. So what is a character arc? So this is not just the plot of your novel. It's not your plot. It is the character's journey, the progression a character takes. And one of my favorite things is there's a huge misperception that characters always progress. Because there's actually a whole bunch of different types of character arcs, but as far as I've kind of boiled it down to 3. So there's a fail arc where a character, instead of succeeding, actually becomes maybe a villain or dies, or Ned in Game of Thrones through book 1 is a wonderful example of a fail arc. He dies. Mm-hmm. He does not succeed. There's also an epic fantasy, the heroic arc. That is the one that we often write about, and the one we readers often expect, and so it's sometimes assumed that it's the only type of arc. And that's where the character starts out as, let's go with the favorite trope of the farm girl who grows up and becomes a great warrior, becomes a king. They succeed in saving the country, becoming a great sorceress, something fantastic and magical. It's a progressive arc because, they do succeed. But there's also one called a flat arc. And that one, you don't see many. The best examples usually are like James Bond or Superman. Think of something where the character, there's a whole bunch of books that could be read in any order. Well, the character arc never changes. They always start the book self-assured that they can solve the problem, and everyone else around them's going, I don't know if you got this one. And at the end, they're proven right. They do succeed. They might have some self-doubts along the way, but they do manage to solve the problem. There is one huge book example that uses a flat arc. Can you guess what that one is?
No. Help me out.
That's probably because you haven't read it. Hunger Games. So that.
All right. I've seen the movies, but I have not read the book.
Yes, Katniss Everdeen. She does not really change. Her character kind of stays the same from beginning to end. Her initial thoughts and feelings about the government, about herself, about everyone except who is her current boyfriend, she doesn't really change over the entire course of 3 books. So that is a flat arc. And that's a good example, one of the rare examples of writing a flat arc in something that is not just a serial series like, James Bond or Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, exactly. If we are defining, the character arc is sort of the change that the character will undergo as the story progresses, right? And so that's good. But now that you mentioned James Bond, that's like the perfect example of a story that doesn't have a character arc. So, and if you're saying the same is in Hunger Games, then at the end of the day, a story does not have to have a character arc. But I do think. At least in the case of James Bond, and I have to be fully transparent here that I've not read the James Bond books, but of course watching the movies I've done. And well, I don't know. You'll have to forgive me here when I say this, but I really don't like James Bond. And I guess, in my view, it's just simply because there's no depth to that character. I mean, because there are no. I mean, essentially, James Bond. Again, going by the movies, but James Bond is the same in the end of the movie as he was in the beginning of the movie. There is no change. And at least in my view, if there are no character arc, then there is no story. That's how I view it. And of course, people can feel absolutely free to disagree with me, but I think the character arc is what adds depth, and without it, it just doesn't work.
No, I can't.
And that's not to say that that now you called I can't remember which words you use for it, but basically it's the same thing. I'm mixing things up here because as I've been talking about before, or we've been talking about before, we have an upcoming book on plotting, and in that book there is a section around character arcs, and in there we called them the positive arc, the negative arc, and the steadfast arc. But it's exactly the same as what Autumn was just saying. It's just some different words for it. So now that I have you all confused, what I wanted to say was that when you are talking about the flat arc, or what we in our upcoming guidebook is calling the steadfast arc, it doesn't mean that because if you're using that flat arc there, it doesn't mean that there is no arc. I mean, that's sort of the difference I'm trying to get at. Mm-hmm. Because maybe the character doesn't truly change their beliefs or who they are, but that, the character can still start with a certain belief, and then the novel plot sort of confirms that belief was correct at the end. So the resolution then reinforces the character's original belief. And if you see what I'm getting at, so if you sort of are working at using the character arc, even if the character doesn't change, but you're using it to show that the belief that the character had is actually true, that's a different one than if you're just saying, okay, here's James Bond and he's going to do some cool shit and then the story's over, right? I mean, those two things are very different, and that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Does that make any sense at all? Or am I just rambling?
No, because there's a lot of things. Just because a character with a flat arc or a steadfast arc, they can start with this belief, the self-belief in, that they can solve this problem, or they are who they say they are. And everyone else doubts, but just because the novel might prove that correct, there's a whole pathway in self-doubts, and, well, it's an arc, and that's what we're going to talk about, is how to actually create that arc. And then the only thing that really changes is that, at the end of a steadfast arc, they're proven correct, where the other arcs, like the negative arc, the positive arc, the negative one, they, instead of being proven correct, they fail. And the other one, the positive arc, they start off believing maybe they're not good enough, and they manage to succeed. They become something greater. So they all kind of have the same starting point, which is useful because to create an arc, it's almost all the same steps. So that's kind of great. And it's not, even though it creates such a nuanced character and creates a whole pathway through the novel for this character, the actual steps to begin creating a novel arc are not that difficult. And so that's really where we need to go next, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. I was just thinking while you were talking there, because I think especially with the positive arc, what did you call it again?
Progressive or an epic or heroic.
This just shows how amateurs we are. We haven't even aligned the terms before we started recording a podcast.
If you Google them, there are like so many arcs, but
indeed,
it's just what's out there.
Yeah, exactly. But what I wanted to say about the positive one is that we're really at the core of it, we're dealing with internal change. It doesn't matter what you call it, to be honest. But if you imagine a positive arc where the character is going from being one kind of person to being another one. So this could be like weakness turning into strength, or fear turning into bravery, and you get the idea, right? So it's an internal change we're talking about. And then as a result, you have this positive arc where at the core of it, the character is sort of still the same person. However, he or she has become, maybe you could say, like a better or more fulfilled version of themselves. So I think that's the root of the positive change.
No, that makes complete sense. And I think often in a positive arc like that, you see an outward change too, but that's more symbolic because they believe more in themselves because they have created this internal change. It creates an external change as well. And that's sort of the fun thing because part of a character arc is internal and external things going on at the same time because sometimes you need those external factors to create the internal change. I mean, really, even in our own lives, why do we change? I changed my hair color to purple because I felt like it. But in general, you change because you know something is going to happen, and that is usually the inciting incident. So that's one
Right.
step. So yeah, it starts with you start with a character who has a certain belief, and you need to create an external event that's going to make them reflect on who they are and what they need to become to reach this other goal.
Yeah, and I think I've from movies and whatnot. I mean, it's often easiest to reference movies because everybody watches a lot of movies, but we don't always read the same books. But in movies, I'm not gonna reference a specific one, but just in general, do you know these kind of movies where something external, something terrible happens? And then afterwards, the next scene, you are seeing the characters now changing because of that external thing happening. And I don't know if it's because, we are writers or I'm a writer that I just see way through that. It's just like, that is, to me, that feels too lazy. And it's like, yeah, okay, I understand that something external and big happened. And I also understand that, of course, it would influence you in one way or another. I fully get that. But sort of using that as your trigger to say, and yeah, now, whoa, here you go. And now the character transformed into somebody else because it just feels too easy to me. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. And to me, my favorite worst movie trope is when you have the flawed character who begins the beginning because of the incident that happened before, like his brother died a horrible death that he somehow feels responsible for. So he is this a lone wolf character who is grieving and standoffish. And you just know where this is going right now so he can win the girl, save the day, blah, 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 blah. So you can see that one coming a mile long. So I think there are always nuances and there's always ways of handling it so that, it's fresh, it's new, so that the character, this is one of my favorite ones with illnesses. We often have this discussion. You think you're on the mend and then you get sick again and then you have to sleep a little bit or you do too much. It's the same with characters and character arcs. Just because something happens, you do not have, something happening it's not a math formula. It does not equal automatic change. There's got to be steps, progressions, backsliding. Other things can happen. That's when you get into the subplots. Then you have this other thing that's pulling it one way, and maybe that's the wrong direction. The love interest, best friend dies. Oh my gosh, now things are really screwed up. So that's actually why I like the 7 steps of story structure, because it's not just a 3-act, 4-act. It has this kind of ups and downs and backsliding and a moment right there in the middle that can be this horrible, tragic event that makes you reevaluate everything again, because you need to kind of have those pushes. So I do know when I do a character arc, I literally start with 4 different parts. And those are usually, we talked about inner and outer things. So inner motivation, there's got to be some inner reason that a character wants to change. We talked about an outer motivation. That's usually an external factor that makes them also realize they need to change to adapt. There's usually inner obstacles. And that's what we're talking about now is the inner obstacles and there's also outer obstacles. But let's start with the inner. The inner are the ones that are like, well, yes, I want to be a writer. That's a good inner obstacle or inner motivation. That's my motivation is I want to be a writer.
I can say that.
Yeah, but the inner obstacles are sort of like, I have doubts. Where do I find the writing time? I don't have anything to write on right now. So those are your other obstacles. Actually, that last one, not having anything to write on, that's an outer obstacle. So you can see how they kind of work together where, it doesn't have to be the arch villain sending henchmen to come and stop you. That's an outer obstacle, but it can be something simple like, I have no writing utensils. Well, that kind of sucks. So those 4 things, though, can start to make the basis of a character arc. So you just need to sit down and think about your character and look at like the inner motivation. What is it the character really wants? What is their secret inner drive? And again, it could be secret. I mean, you could have a character that goes around telling everyone, I want to be the world's best champion and blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to have that one in the back corner who's like, they can't even admit it to themselves that they secretly want to be a great sorcerer because everyone knows that magic isn't real, but that's what they really, really want, but they never tell anyone unless they're like totally drunk. And that's the fun of having characters. This is where you start bringing out those nuances that I talked about. And that's why I said I'll try not to get too off track, because this is what I love about character building, is that you take that little nugget, that inner motivation, the thing that they secretly want, and, you decide if your character is out there boasting that this is what they want, or if it's the one who's in the corner saying, no, I just want to sit here. All I want to do is sit here. And I just want to watch the world go around, where really, there's a lot more going on back there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're quite right in saying that, everything sort of fits together. It's like one big puzzle. And that's also why in the plotting book that we are finishing up, there's a lot of diagrams and whatnot in it, because everything sort of just, it slots in together like one big puzzle. But I do think that the key here is that you can use those external events like we just talked about to help facilitate the change, but the core of it, or the root of it, should be the character's own needs and motives. Absolutely. So if you use that as your starting point to trigger the transformation, and then of course you can use these external events to support it as like a supporting structure. But if you use the inner motivations as your driver, then it will not come across like those movies that we were talking about before, where, something happened and whoopee, then now the person changed, because if you can recognize that, well, this character already had this motive inside of him or her, and now they were trying to do something about it, or they wanted to change maybe, and then something external happened and sort of pushed them over the line. Then it works, and then it comes across as very authentic, and then you really feel like, okay, that this makes sense, So and that's why I said before that if you just push them over the line with the external event alone, that's where, to me, it feels too flat and it feels like cheating, because that's sort of the easy solution, right? Whereas figuring out what are their inner motivations and how do I actually build it up so that I both make it plausible why they have this motivation, but I'm also showing it to the reader. And then I'm using that as a weapon to drive the character arc. That is not easy, and that requires some serious thinking and some serious work. And that's why it comes across as authentic, because it actually makes sense.
It does. I think that's so true and so important. That's why I like books that, even though they start with action, but it's not necessarily the big action of the novel. It's like a little action, and every day, like, one of the favorites is like showing that, what's going to be your main character. Maybe they're picked on as a kid, or they're struggling every day. They don't quite fit in. They kind of already harbor a desire for something different, like you're saying. And then the big inciting incident comes and gives them an opportunity to become this new person. It's sort of, even if they sometimes miss it, but it's those books where everything is, a field of flowers and it's sunny and breezy, and then everything goes up in flames and they have to become the great heroic person. You're right. If they had started as this peace-loving person and now they have to go to war, it doesn't have the same resonance. It's a different type of story, and it feels forced, where if you see that character struggling a little bit in those first pages, that they kind of want to be something different. They're trying to be something different, and they're just trying to get by. And then your inciting incident happens, that outer motivation happens. And then you see the character, going, hey, this sucks, but maybe I can get something out of this to become. It can become a stepping stone instead of the giant rock rolling down the mountainside and crushing you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think there is another place whereby the character arc coincides or aligns itself very well with the actual plot of the novel. So you were just talking about basically, well, the trigger we could say, in the beginning, where maybe the inciting incident helps in facilitating the change to start.
Yes.
But then if we move to the end of the novel or the end of the character arc, one of the things that we're trying to align with our future guidebook here on how to plot a novel is actually to make sure that the end of the character arc coincides with the climax of the story.
Absolutely.
Because if you can make that happen so that the character arc actually peaks at the same time that we're reaching the climax, then that is really a good way to, generate a very true reaction in the reader. And I think when that happens, then that is actually what will make them remember the story, right? That's what makes them tell other people about how amazing this story really was, because it wasn't just a climactic, fantasy battle against the evil necromancer in the end of the story, but it was also the time where the character actually came into his or her true being, and because of that, they succeeded. Then it's awesome.
Absolutely. That's, to me, especially, that's a whole different topic getting in between character-driven versus plot-driven. Because with fantasy, just about with all of the books we're talking about, people talk about them being character-driven, when really all of these books are plot-driven. But when the character arc lines up with the plot so that it's kind of driving the plot and forcing things to happen, that is when the novel becomes fantastic. That's when it feels like it is a character-driven novel, when actually we have a plot, and the plot is what's really driving the whole story. But the character is making it feel like it's all happening because of this internal change, their struggles, and the outer obstacles that are coming at them. And I agree, that's when you can combine those two, and there are definitely steps to do that, and diagrams and a whole bunch of other ways to make sure your plot is lined up with your character arc, and so that things are feeding into each other, and then you hit the climax, and it all has to happen. It's not just a climax of the plot and these big outside events that are going to happen, but it's also the climax of the character arc, and are they going to succeed or fail, or what's going to happen to the character? Oh my gosh, that's when you're like gripping the page, and you know that's when you're up at 3 a.m., you're tired,
yeah, exactly.
you go to work in 2 hours. Those are the books that are just so riveting. And yeah, that is where it's really part of the character arc and lining it up with the plot so that it all happens and seems to be interconnected. And it doesn't just happen randomly. It takes work. And if you're a pantser and you do it afterwards, it's just a lot of editing, but you can do it too. If you're a plotter or a hybrid, more like me, you gotta kind of remember that and work it out and make sure it's happening, and the different events are triggering the different aspects. The events in the plot are triggering the character arc, and the character arc is triggering things in the plot. And then it's like, bam, this is a huge novel. This is so exciting.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that stuff about the plot-driven versus character-driven story, because actually, I'm actually making one of the or an argument in the plotting book in the character section of the book. Because if you go through the exercises necessary to create both a proper character, but also creating a proper character arc, then the argument I'm making in the book is that there is no such thing as a purely plot-driven book, because the book is always about the characters. It is always about the character change. That is what a story is about. Mm-hmm. A story is not about country A is going to war with country B, and then in the end of the novel, one of them wins. That's not a story. The story is interesting if there are characters in that setting who goes to war, and the effect that war has on them as a person, and maybe on their family, or what do I know. But that's where the story is. So there is no such thing as a plot-driven story if you at least follow the methodology that we are laying out in this future book here that you're going to get your hands on at some point. Because it is about the characters, and it always has been.
And that's what I think is true. I mean, when people ask me if I have a hard time coming up with story ideas, if you can come up with a character, if you can look at something, I have a bottle of conditioner on my desk, don't ask, it has something to do with the purpling. But if you have something and you just start adding character nuances, start adding motivation and personifying something, you can write an interesting piece of flash fiction to an entire novel, because that's what resonates with people. That's what people want to know, is the story of that individual, that personified object even. That's all it takes sometimes to come up with a story is to simply look around your house and say, what do you think is the inner desires of my houseplant? And see where you end up going. Because trust me, you'll find a story in everything. Throw in a little bit of magic and a mad cat, and you're going to be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't, if Autumn, if we had been a bit smart about this stuff, we would have had recorded this podcast episode like maybe in the week leading up to us actually releasing the book that we're talking about, because this is just us again. But we thought that thought it an interesting topic, so we just wanted to share some ideas and give you, the listeners something to think about around the character arcs and why it is so important. But if we had been smart, as I said, we would have aligned it with the release of that book, but we didn't. But I don't know if we should say something. When do we actually expect to have this book done, do you think?
Oh, let's see. There's a chance it could still be by the end of this year. Otherwise, I think it'll be very early in 2020. But, I think maybe we're smarter than we realize. So it's a huge book and there's so much in it and so much good stuff. So I bet we can find another topic and this will just wet your whistle, and we'll do another one, I'm sure, on something that is also the plotting books. I know we've mentioned it at least twice now. So it'll be important, and we'll be able to tie it all in and then announce its forthcoming release. But it's going well, and I think we'll get there very soon. You remember, I had to do we did mention there's a lot of diagrams, and I am still putting those together as well. So it's coming.
Yeah. I mean, I think the major or the biggest hurdle that is left, apart from, of course, some diagrams and whatnot, but other than that, I think that the biggest hurdles that we have left is that we want to include a free download with the book where you can basically download the plot for our first book in our new trilogy. And why we want to do that is basically because then you have the book as your guide, and you can go through all the teachings in that guide. And basically then by downloading our, that free version or the free plot for our book 1, you can basically see all that theory in practice. So seeing how did we actually do what we are teaching in the book. So we thought that would make like an excellent accompany or companion, whatever you want to call it, to the plotting book, to make it the teachings even easier to understand and easier to follow. So that's basically the biggest hurdle here from a time perspective, is that we need to then complete the entire plot for the first book before we can do anything else. But other than that, the entire book, it has been written already, and it just needs some editing, and then it needs that download that will take quite some time. And diagrams, secret diagrams. Yeah, so characters are essential to any story, and without it, you have no story. Next week, we're going to talk about ISBN numbers.
If you like what you just heard, there's a few things you can do to support the AmWritingFantasy podcast. Please tell a fellow author about the show and visit us at Apple Podcast and leave a rating and review. You can also join Autumn and Jesper on patreon.com/AmWritingFantasy. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get awesome rewards and keep the AmWritingFantasy podcast going. Stay safe out there and see you next Monday.